Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through guilt. And the most brutal kind of revenge isn't about destroying the other person. It's making them destroy themselves. Quietly, slowly, from the inside. That's what Machiavelli understood better than anyone. He knew that the truly powerful never chase vengeance with blood. They don't lash out, they don't rant, they don't beg to be understood. They simply install doubt in the enemy's mind and then vanish. Because guilt is the most untraceable weapon in the game of control. You don't even have to be in the room for it to work. All you need is patience, stillness, and a complete understanding of how to restructure their self-image until they begin questioning themselves, their story, and eventually their own moral high ground. So how do you do it? How do you make someone feel guilty? Not by confrontation, but by the silence they can't ignore. It starts with this core principle. Guilt doesn't come from what they did. It comes from what they can't explain. When someone hurts you, betrays you, lies to you, mocks you, replaces you, they usually expect one of two reactions. Anger, so they can justify their behavior as necessary. Pain, so they can position themselves as powerful. They want a visible emotional response because it protects their ego. It tells them, I mattered enough to affect you, but I also had to do this. I had no choice. The Machiavellian response is to deny them both. You don't react. You don't retaliate. You don't even acknowledge the wound. Instead, you create an emotional vacuum, a strange silence that doesn't match their expectations. This is where the guilt begins, because now they have nothing to work with. No justifications, no clean role to play, no I had to do it because you narrative to fall back on. And without that, their mind starts to loop. They ask themselves, why didn't they say anything? Are they planning something? Do they know something I don't? Were they better than I thought? This is psychological instability, and it only grows with time, because the one thing people fear more than confrontation is being forgotten, especially by someone they know they hurt. And that's your first move. You don't punish them with rage, you punish them with irrelevance. But this isn't about ghosting. This isn't about blocking them out of spite. That's too emotional, too obvious. They'll frame that as you being too sensitive or dramatic. No, the silent revenge Machiavelli would recommend is different. It's more surgical. Goes like this. You stop explaining. You stop reacting. You withdraw with elegance, not bitterness. This is the key. Your silence must look intentional, not emotional. It must look like it comes from power, not pain. Because when they see you calm, centered, unshaken, that's when the cognitive dissonance begins. They expected chaos. They got stillness. They expected drama. They got distance. They expected to feel superior. But now they feel watched. Not literally, but psychologically. Because silence carries presence. And your silence says, I saw what you did. I understood it completely. And I'm still not breaking character. That is devastating. And it leads to the next phase, the unraveling of their story. Most people who hurt you have already constructed a mental narrative that makes them the reasonable one. I had to walk away. They were too much. I couldn't handle the negativity. They were never going to change. These aren't truths, they're defense mechanisms, and those defenses depend on your reaction to stay alive. But when you don't react, when you don't give them the mess they needed to justify the mess they caused, now the story breaks. They start to re-examine the timeline. They begin to doubt their actions. And slowly the guilt creeps in, not because you said anything, but because your absence left them alone with themselves. This is where Machiavelli's brilliance shines. He knew that true power isn't in what you do, it's in what you don't need to do anymore. You don't need to prove they were wrong. You don't need to defend your value. You don't need to show them what they lost, because you've become undeniable, not by getting louder, but by becoming unreachable. And it only gets worse for them, because in your absence they begin to remember you differently. When someone hurts you and you respond with rage, they get to remember you as unstable, emotional, difficult. But when you walk away with quiet clarity, now they remember. The way you didn't beg, the way you didn't spiral, the way you kept your dignity in the very moment they tried to strip it. This creates a brutal contradiction in their mind. If they were that composed, why did I treat them like that? And that's the question that won't leave them alone. It digs deeper the more time passes, especially when they compare you to others, when they realize that no one else matches your calm, your presence, your depth. And now, every time they think of you, it's not with triumph, it's with tension, with discomfort, with guilt, because you didn't collapse. You vanished with power. You let them walk through the door they slammed in your face, only to find there was no one chasing them, no one weeping, no one proving anything, just silence. And in that silence, their conscience begins to rot. That's the opening move of silent revenge, not destruction, distortion. You let them sit alone inside their own story until it starts to fall apart. And when it does, they won't know how to stop it, because you never gave them a villain to blame. You gave them only one person to face, themselves. Guilt is most powerful when it's not demanded but activated, not when you say, "You hurt me," but when they start wondering if they did, all on their own. That's how you break someone from within. You don't corner them. You don't accuse them. You don't chase closure. You simply set the stage for one slow question to start echoing in their mind. What if I was the one who ruined something real? But this doesn't happen by accident. Machiavelli would tell you that guilt must be architected, not with lies, but with strategic silence, composure, and contrast. After you've withdrawn without rage, after you've exited with elegance and denied them your reaction, the next stage begins. It's called the contrast phase. This is when your absence begins to compete with their present. You don't post vague quotes. You don't hint at your pain. You don't make cryptic references to them. You do the opposite. You appear better, calmer, more focused, unbothered. But, and this is the part most people miss, you don't look like you're trying to look better. You appear grounded, focused on real things, not revenge, not rebounding, not loud celebration. You don't look like you're winning, you look like you were never affected. And this is pure psychological warfare, because now the person who hurt you has to sit with the disturbing truth. I hurt them, but they never fell apart. It's the opposite of what they expected. They expected mess. They expected bitterness. They expected weakness. But all they see is silence, strength, and unsettling calm. This contrast begins to fracture their internal justification. The excuses they told themselves start to feel hollow. The narrative begins to crumble. They begin thinking things like, maybe I misjudged them. Maybe I gave up too soon. Maybe they were the one person who actually understood me. And now the guilt begins to fester. But here's what Machiavelli would warn. Don't interfere. Let it grow. Because most people ruin this stage by returning too early, by trying to check in, by posting something passive-aggressive to stir attention, by re-engaging under the illusion of closure. That's not power. That's neediness in disguise. Real power doesn't return. It haunts. You haunt them through grace, through your refusal to speak badly of them, through the mystery of your peace. They ask others about you. They stalk your presence online. They scan your words for clues, and all they find is absence, or worse, stability, which is unbearable to someone who thought they broke you. Because guilt needs contrast to survive. Without contrast, their actions remain necessary. But with contrast, visible growth, dignity, distance, the guilt multiplies. You don't become the villain in their story. You become the better option they threw away. Machiavelli would tell you that guilt, once activated, needs pressure, not from you, but from time and their own conscience. This means you must remain emotionally invisible. No rants, no dramatic returns, no emotional closure speeches. You must let them sit with their memory of you, not the version you give them now, the version they betrayed. Let them remember how patient you were, how much you listened, how calm you were in conflict, how much they felt seen, understood, validated. Because memory is emotional, and over time they won't remember the reasons they left. They'll remember how they felt when they were with you. And the more they reflect, the more one truth eats away at them. I treated someone who meant well like an enemy. Now, here's the Machiavellian twist. Guilt, when fully formed, turns into self-punishment. You don't have to call them out. They'll do it to themselves. They'll find themselves, comparing everyone new to you, hearing your voice in moments of doubt, wishing they'd handled it differently, feeling that cold emptiness when their ego fades and your silence remains. And just like that, your revenge is complete, without lifting a finger. But here's what separates shallow games from true psychological dominance. You don't want them to come back. You want them to carry that guilt forever. Because Machiavelli didn't believe in taking people back after betrayal. He believed in keeping the advantage. And when someone feels they can come back, they no longer feel guilty. They feel hopeful. They feel relieved. So if they try, don't slam the door. That's loud, emotional, transparent. Just leave the door closed with no response, no explanation, just the same calm distance you've always kept. That ambiguity, that's the final nail, because now they don't even get rejection, they get confusion. They don't know how you feel. They don't know if you've moved on or simply erased them. They don't know if you ever even needed them to begin with. And that unknown is the most psychologically punishing state a person can sit in. People can heal from conflict. They rarely heal from unanswered silence, especially when they know they earned it. You become a mirror they can't escape, and every time they look in it, they don't see you. They see their mistake. That's what Machiavelli would call perfect revenge. Not through destruction, but through quiet reflection turned into endless consequence. The most powerful revenge doesn't come from making them suffer. It comes from making them see themselves clearly, without you needing to say a word. Because silence, when weaponized correctly, becomes a mirror. And for the person who wronged you, that mirror doesn't reflect your pain, it reflects their betrayal, their own choices, their moral cracks, their growing inability to explain what they did to someone who never lost composure. This is where the psychological burn begins to deepen. Because most people who hurt you aren't truly malicious. They're fragile. And fragile people tell themselves stories to survive what they've done. They paint you as the reason. They look for signs that validate their betrayal. They need your failure to justify their own cowardice. But when you don't fail, when you thrive, when your name carries more dignity in absence than theirs does in presence, their story collapses, and guilt doesn't just enter. It takes residence. Machiavelli knew this. It's not enough to simply go silent. You must control what survives of your image in the minds of others. Because even though you're silent, they're not. People who betray often talk. They vent. They plant narratives. They try to preempt your version by creating one of their own. She was too emotional. He was never really present. They pushed me away. They're bitter. They'll try to ruin me. These aren't accusations. These are shields. Psychological shields to block their own guilt from taking root. But here's how you kill the story without even addressing it. You don't respond. You don't clarify. You don't expose receipts. You live in such calm contradiction to their narrative that it falls apart in the eyes of everyone watching. You never speak against them. You never correct what others think they heard. You just continue operating with poise, subtle grace, a collected presence. And over time, people begin to notice you're not who they said you were. You're not broken, not messy, not dramatic. You're fine, too fine, suspiciously fine. And that contradiction forces observers, and eventually the betrayer, to wonder, if they weren't who I said they were, then who was I for doing what I did? That's the seed of long-term guilt. And once that doubt is planted in other people's minds, it begins to echo inside theirs, even louder, because now it's not just their guilt. It's guilt reflected back by everyone who notices your restraint. This is why Machiavelli favored stillness over defense. Because when someone wrongs you and you don't speak, the world assumes either you're guilty or you're so solid you don't need to defend yourself. And when your actions stay aligned, when you keep showing up stable, authentic, emotionally grounded, the second interpretation always wins. Guilt is not activated by silence alone. It's magnified when your silence is followed by growth. If you want someone to suffer the weight of what they did to you, you don't retreat. You evolve. But here's the key. You don't evolve loudly. You evolve in total alignment. That means your energy shifts from reactive to composed. Your body language becomes cleaner, less scattered, more intentional. You speak less, but when you do, your words are sharp and spaced. You don't chase comfort. You embody self-sufficiency. In practical terms, you get in better shape, not to flex, but because you no longer tolerate decay. You refine your space, your room, your social circle, your routines. You stop being accessible to people who don't operate on your standard. This creates one brutal truth in the mind of the person who wronged you. They didn't collapse without me. They evolved. And that is what guilt feeds on, not your pain, but your rise without them. Every new improvement becomes a message, not spoken but seen. Every ounce of peace you radiate says, you weren't the storm, you were just a weak chapter. And when they compare that to their own life, still full of noise, chaos, shallow highs, they start to notice. The person they abandoned is the person they should have grown with. Now comes the final twist Machiavelli would love. If at some point they try to come back, don't slam the door. That gives them drama. That gives them a clear ending. It gives them closure, and closure kills guilt. Instead, you receive them with neutrality, not kindness, not cruelty, just emotional weightlessness. You don't attack, you don't reference the past, you let them speak, explain, perform. And when they finish, you simply say something like, I appreciate you saying that. I'm at peace with everything now. That line is devastating, because what you're saying is, you've moved beyond needing their apology. Their presence is no longer emotionally relevant. They can't fix what they thought they could control. And in that moment, the guilt becomes permanent, because now they know they didn't just hurt someone who was fragile. They lost someone who turned pain into power, who never tried to retaliate, who never begged to be seen, who never played the victim, and who will now live on, not as a memory, but as a standard they will never reach again. And that is the final punishment. Not vengeance, not violence, not destruction, just the invisible weight of knowing. They gave up something rare, and now it's unreachable. The deepest guilt doesn't come from a scream. It comes from a whisper that never came, from a confrontation that never happened, from a response they thought they were prepared for, but that never arrived. Because people don't feel guilty when you tell them what they did. They feel guilty when they start to realize it on their own, in silence, in memory, in moments when they least expect it. This is what Machiavelli understood so well, that silence isn't avoidance, it's erosion. You don't need to say anything, you just become a phantom in their mind, showing up at inconvenient moments, in the middle of new relationships, in conversations that remind them of something you used to say, in dreams, in songs, in people they compare you to and can't help but feel disappointed by. This is what you engineered through the prior stages: silent withdrawal, without rage. Controlled contrast, showing calm while they expected collapse. Public stillness, which disarmed their narrative. Private evolution, which reframed the memory of you into something they destroyed. And now we enter the next phase of the strategy: psychological residue. Because here's the brutal truth: they don't move on. Not really. They may date, post, party, pretend, but the more you disappear, the more you embed yourself. Not as a person, but as a feeling. That feeling is regret, disguised as confusion, and the longer you maintain your composure, the more that confusion becomes a haunting. They might say, "I'm fine. It wasn't a big deal. We just weren't a match." But they're checking your page, reading old messages, noticing who you're connected with, waiting, always waiting, to see if you'll reach out. And when you don't, that silence begins to take on meaning. Not because of what it is, but because of what it denies them. A way to release their guilt. Because closure, it's not for you, it's for them. They want you to explode, so they can say, "See, they're unstable." They want you to beg, so they can feel superior. They want you to explain, so they can rationalize walking away. But when you do none of those things, when you give them no story to hang their guilt on, then all they're left with is the weight of their own choices. This is where the punishment deepens. Because when they see that you're not coming back, they start to reflect, not because they want to heal you, but because they want to escape what they did. And now you have them in the most vulnerable position imaginable. They know they were wrong. They can't justify it, and they can't apologize because your silence has stripped away their access to redemption. This is Machiavelli's true mastery. He didn't seek to punish his enemies in the moment. He let time rot their sense of certainty. He planted doubt, then disappeared, knowing it would grow into self-destruction. You stop being the person they can describe with a sentence. You become something mysterious, undefined, and therefore unresolvable. They can't say you were toxic if you were calm. They can't say you were weak if you never chased. They can't say you were controlling if you released them completely. They can't explain what they did. And when someone can't explain their mistake, they carry it forever. Now guilt hardens. Don't return. Ever. This is where most people fail. They hold silence for a while and then break it. One message, one response, one hope you're well. That single moment relieves the pressure. The guilt evaporates. They get their story back. See, they still care. I didn't ruin anything. Don't give them that. True revenge is incompleteness. Not cruel, not dramatic, just final. The kind of silence that says, "I've gone somewhere you can't follow." They'll talk to people about you, try to reconstruct what went wrong. Some will even try to write their guilt into new relationships, saying things like, "This time I'll be better." I'm not going to repeat my mistakes, but it's not healing. It's avoidance. They're not over you. They're haunted by the fact that you had every reason to collapse, and you didn't. And that's why your image won't fade. Because you didn't fall. You didn't explain. You didn't scream. You disappeared into excellence. And now they're the only ones still talking about what happened. That's what makes guilt permanent. You didn't destroy them. You left them to live with the slow realization that they broke something sacred, and the person they broke never needed to say a word. This is how guilt metastasizes, not with drama, but with memory, with comparisons, with echoes of you in moments where their current life feels small and yours feels untouchable. It's not about making them suffer, it's about making them see. And what they'll see, slowly, painfully, is this. I didn't just lose someone, I lost someone I didn't deserve. And they'll carry that, not as punishment from you, but as a sentence they gave themselves, the moment you chose not to fight, not to chase, not to explain. but to rise. There comes a moment, days, weeks, sometimes even years after they hurt you, when silence turns into a mirror so sharp they can no longer look away. A moment when they realize you didn't just walk away, you evolved beyond their reach. That's the final stage of Machiavelli's silent revenge. Not just their guilt, but their permanent understanding that they will never have access to you again. Because while they've tried to fill the space you once occupied with noise, with distractions, with shallow substitutes, you've moved differently. You never reacted. You never defended yourself. You never looked back. And in that absence, you became mythic, a quiet force they can't touch. Not because you disappeared, but because you left so completely that your memory no longer feels like a person. It feels like judgment. But here's the part they'll never admit. They want to be forgiven. They want you to say it's okay. Not because they're sorry, but because they want permission to stop feeling guilty. That's what most apologies are. Not redemption, relief. So Machiavelli would say, never give it to them. Let them feel the slow weight of their own conscience. Let it bend them. Let it follow them into future relationships, future failures, future quiet nights where the lights are off and there's no one left to perform for. Let them sit with the truth. You gave them peace. They returned chaos. You gave them honesty. They returned strategy. You gave them grace. They returned blame. And worst of all, you gave them silence and they still kept speaking. Now, here's what separates theatrical revenge from psychological dominance. You don't let your evolution become their closure. That means no subtle social media hints, no "I'm better off" posts, no dramatic reinvention on display. Your transformation must look private, not performative, not like you're trying to prove anything. Just a quiet return to your true self, the self they couldn't recognize, and now can't access. Because what haunts people isn't just the memory of someone they hurt, it's the possibility that they never truly knew you at all. And now it's too late. They begin asking questions that will never be answered. Did they ever love me? Were they always this calm? Did I underestimate them? Did I let me go, or did I just never matter? These questions don't end in closure. They end in self-collapse. That's the essence of silent revenge. It's not a war. It's erosion. Slow, quiet, irreversible. You didn't push back. You let them walk off the cliff they built themselves. And if they ever return, if they ever try to come back into your life with apologies or nostalgia, you don't respond with cruelty. You don't lecture. You don't tell them what they did wrong. You simply say, I've outgrown the conversation. That line ends everything. It tells them, you are not angry. You are not bitter. You are simply not available to be the lesson anymore. And nothing cuts deeper than knowing you're not even worth an explanation. You're not even someone they're allowed to make it right with. Because what they broke wasn't a relationship. It was the version of you that would have forgiven them. That version is gone now, and in its place stands someone colder, quieter, sharper, not because they were hurt, but because they refused to be humiliated twice. This is how Machiavellian revenge works. Not with blood, not with drama, with dignity that suffocates ego. Because when someone wrongs you and you don't respond, when you move on without a trace of vindictiveness, when your life becomes quieter and yet somehow more powerful, you become the one thing every guilty person fears, a mirror that never speaks back. You hold up that silence until they finally say it, not to you but to themselves. I broke something I didn't understand, and I'll never be forgiven for it. And that is the justice. No dramatic monologue, no public revenge, just a lifetime of comparison. You become the standard, not the ex, not the former friend, not the one who got away. You become the internal benchmark they never meet again, every good moment tainted by the thought of how much better it felt with you. every new bond haunted by the memory of the one they ruined. And the worst part? They'll know they can't undo it. They'll know they had all the chances. They'll know you weren't perfect, but you were honest. You were real. You were rare. And they let it rot. This is the price they pay. Not because you punished them, but because you didn't need to. Because when someone hurts you and you turn away, not in anger, but in power, and you never come back, you become unforgettable, not through presence, but through the void you left behind. And that void, that's your masterpiece.